Hey guys, YouTube here. Okay, and now, as I have told you guys, now it's that time of the year again. May is now coming upon us, and every year, for the month of May, I always dedicate it to like a certain subject where I make videos on that subject. And this year, of course, it is going to continue. So in this video, I am going to tell you guys what my plans are this year for the month of May. So if you see the title of the video, you can probably kind of guess what this I am going to be doing this year for the month of May. What this is really about is it's kind of like it is about like a subject regarding Disney films. And because I've already talked about like a whole bunch of Disney films. Like I've made reviews for like a lot of Disney films. Like I've done like a few like series of like top 10 countdowns where I've like reviewed like the top 10 best Disney films. Like I did it for like I did two like separate lists for like the best hand-drawn animated Disney films. I did like a top 10, and then I also did like a next top 10 where I was like talking about like the basically the runners up to the ones I did in that first one. And then I also did a series where I like was reviewing my picks for the top 10 best live action Disney films. And plus I also like did a series of reviews where I was like kind of going over the sequels to the movies I had in the top 10 best live action Disney films. And even like outside of those reviews, I've even talked about some other Disney films before. So I have really already like talked a lot about like Disney films before. This year for the month of May, I'm gonna be doing like another series of Disney reviews, but it's gonna be kind of different than what than sort of type of Disney films I'm gonna be talking about. Now, what is this really about? Well, have you guys like noticed that like this is like basically like me talking really like me referring to like Disney films that were really released like in the 2000s decade, like from 2000 and like to 2009. Because have you guys like noticed that like there's not really like a whole lot of Disney films that were like released in the 2000s decade that people really do seem to talk about a lot. I mean, there are some that people really do like talk about a lot. Like there, of course, was like a Lilo and Stitch that came out in 2002, and there's of course like the original Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy that like people really loved, and there were like some other movies that like whether for or good or bad reasons people really do seem to remember. Like Chicken Little is kind of like a movie that people really like it is like a movie that people really do seem to know, but it has like not really had a really good reception. There were like some Disney films like in the 2000s that really did like are like known well, and people really do seem to remember and talk about a lot. But have you guys noticed that like throughout the entire like 2000s decade, there were really like a lot of Disney films that really did kind of just like fall into like total obscurity, and just people really don't really seem to really talk about like a whole lot of Disney films that had like been released in the 2000s decade. A lot of them just like really seem to just like come and go. Like there were a lot that like when they were first released, people really did like seem to really talk about them. Like they did seem to know them. But once time passed, like those films just kind of like went into like obscurity, and nobody really mentioned them a whole lot. And you could kind of like make the argument that this kind of like started like before like the turn of the century. Like even like in like the late '90s, like there was like this trend that really started as well. Like where like a lot of the Disney movies that really were coming out like during that generation, they really did like become very obscure, and nobody really talked about them. Like I've noticed that like when Doug Walker has done like Disney summer reviews before, that he really hasn't been really talking about like some films that really did come out like during like the late '90s and going into the 2000s. Like I've noticed that he is kind of like leaving out some. And so and yeah, whether like it is like animated or live action, like there were a lot of films that like were released in like the 2000s decade that really just seemed to come and go, and people really don't really talk about didn't really talk about them like after like just like they were like relatively new releases, and then and yeah, then they just like fell into absolute obscurity. And so yeah, so this is like what I'm going to be doing this year for the month of May. I'm just going to be going through like the Disney films that were released like in the 2000s decade, whether they are animated or live action. Like animated or live action films are like eligible for these reviews. Yeah. And yeah, and I am really just gonna go through like these films that like like were released in the 2000s, but yeah, when you really hear of these films today, they're really like films that really just like fell into absolute obscurity, and people really don't seem to really talk about them any that a whole lot now. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, like this isn't like specifically for animated films or live action films. Yeah, whether either one, and I will talk about like I am gonna like talk about both like live action and animated films in the series of reviews, because yeah, it isn't even like down to just like one of those types of films, like whether they were animated or live action. Like a lot of the Disney films in general that were released in the 2000s have really just like fallen into like total obscurity, and a whole lot of people don't really talk about them. So yeah, yeah, so that's really what I'm going to be doing. So yeah, so to make it clear, like the kind of films that I really am going to be talking about, like I'm not really like referring to like the direct to video animated sequels. Like of course, like Disney has like a whole trend of like those, and a lot of those were released in the 2000s. But yeah, I'm not really talking about like a film like that. I'm really like actually talking about like theatrical films. So yeah, yeah, so I'm only going to be talking about theatrical Disney films that were released like in the 2000s that really have just like fallen into like absolute obscurity. So yeah, so it's only live action films. And another catch to this is that um, there are some films that I have picked to really talk about in these for these reviews. Like there are quite a few of these films that do have sequels, but yeah, I'm not going to be really like talking reviewing like any sequels to any of these films I do have in these like decide to take a look at in this list that do have sequels, because yeah, I already have like quite a lot of movies these that I decided to talk about here. I've already come up with like 20 movies to discuss in this us for these reviews. So yeah, so I'm really just, since I already like kind of like have a lot of films to really talk about, I'm just kind of like gonna like not really focus on sequels and really just like stick to like the main film and stuff. So yeah, so I'll only talk about like the original film for any of these films that may have like sequels. So yeah, I'm only yeah going to be talking about like the original film, not their any of their sequels. Yeah, and I'm not really going to be talking about like absolutely every film that was released in the 2000s, because yeah, like I said before, there are like some films that were released during that time that really are famous and people do still know today. But yeah, I'm just really going to be like focusing on the ones that I really don't hear like a whole lot of people really talking about today when they do talk about like Disney films that were released in the 2000s. So yeah, so that's going to be the catch to this. So yeah, so like I said, this is only like going to be covering films that were released in the 2000s decade. Right, so it's films that were released like anytime from like 2000 to 2009. So 2009 is the cutoff date or the cutoff time for these movies, and yeah, like I said, it just ranges from like when they were filmed or when they were released, like anywhere from the year 2000, specifically 2000 to 2009. So yeah, so those are the films that are eligible for, or yeah, the films in like that time that I'm going to be talking about. All right, so yeah, so those are going to be my plans this year for the month of May. So yeah, so stay tuned for these reviews of the obscure 2000s Disney films throughout the entire month of May. All right, so yeah, so those are going to be coming up throughout the month, so stay tuned for those. So yeah, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.